Have you ever sat across from someone, heard them say something so simple, so harmless on the surface, yet deep down something in your body tensed? Maybe your chest tightened. Maybe your stomach sank. Not because the words were loud or cruel, but because they carried a weight your heart recognized before your mind could catch up. There's a moment, a very specific kind of moment in many women's lives. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It shows up when someone you care about says, "You have to accept me as I am." And maybe the first time it even feels reasonable. After all, we all want to be accepted. We crave that kind of love that sees us, flaws and all, and stays. But what happens when that phrase stops being a bridge and starts becoming a shield? A wall built to protect not vulnerability, but resistance? I remember hearing that line once, delivered with a sigh and a slight shrug, like it was the end of the conversation, not the start of one. And I remember the quiet confusion that followed. Was I being too demanding? Was I expecting too much? Wasn't this what love was unconditional? It took me years, honestly, to realize that unconditional love and uncritical tolerance aren't the same thing. That someone asking for acceptance is not the problem, but someone using that request to escape growth is. When "this is just how I am" becomes a catch-all excuse, you're no longer in a relationship. You're in a negotiation where only one person is allowed to evolve. Carl Jung spoke often of the shadow, the unclaimed parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge. The parts we hide, not just from the world, but from our own reflection. And when someone uses the phrase, "accept me as I am," to lock those shadows in a dark room, they're not asking to be loved. They're asking to be excused from growth, from reflection, from responsibility. And here's where it gets heavy. Because as women, especially women who have done the hard work of healing, we often think love means patience. We think love means carrying the extra emotional weight until they catch up. We mistake their immobility for woundedness, their avoidance for fear, and maybe it is fear, but it doesn't change the outcome. You end up rowing a boat alone. You start adjusting your rhythm. You start making excuses for their silence. You shrink your needs so they feel less confronted by them. And soon you're no longer yourself. You're just the version of you that causes the least disruption. That's not love. That's self-abandonment. There's a subtle tragedy in watching yourself become the caretaker of someone else's denial. And you'll justify it at first because you've seen their potential. You know they've been hurt. You want to be different from those who left. But love, built on the hope that they'll eventually choose growth, is like building a house on sand. It shifts under you. It never settles. And no matter how beautiful the architecture, it collapses in time. The truth is, we all have shadows. Every one of us carries traits we're ashamed of, patterns we inherited, wounds we haven't cleaned out. The difference isn't in who has them, it's in who chooses to face them. Who takes responsibility for what spills out of them when they're tired, triggered, or afraid? And who asks their partner to love their blind spots instead of shining a light on them? "Accept me as I am" is only a red flag when it becomes a door slammed shut on accountability. When growth is no longer mutual, the relationship becomes lopsided. You start learning, reading, softening, communicating, while they remain perfectly untouched by the discomfort of self-inquiry. You want to know the irony? The people who say this the most, they often demand change from you. They want you to be more patient, less reactive, more supportive, less emotional. They expect evolution from you while refusing it for themselves. And if you point this out, they might accuse you of trying to change them, as if asking for respect, responsibility, and reciprocity is somehow coercive. But growth isn't coercion. Boundaries aren't ultimatums. And asking someone to show up with emotional maturity is not a betrayal of love. It's a declaration of it. Because real love wants expansion. It wants both people to become more, not less. Sometimes I imagine it like this. You're holding hands, standing on a ledge together, overlooking the next version of yourselves. And one of you say, let's jump. Let's become better than we've been. And the other says, no, I like it here. You go if you want, but don't expect me to follow. That's what this phrase can become. A refusal to leap, a refusal to try. And the moment you leap alone and look back, you realize maybe they were never holding your hand at all. Maybe they were just resting in your grip. This isn't about blaming anyone. People resist change for reasons that are often rooted in trauma, shame, fear of failure. But none of those reasons are yours to heal. You're not his therapist. You're not his savior. You're a woman who has fought to become whole. And you don't owe your wholeness to someone who uses love as an excuse to remain half. Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And in relationships like these, fate starts looking an awful lot like exhaustion, like crying yourself to sleep because you feel unseen, like resenting yourself for bringing it up again, like being so emotionally tired that silence starts to feel safer than honesty. If any of this feels too familiar, I want you to know you're not dramatic. You're not too much. You're not demanding. You're awake. And being awake in a world that often rewards numbness is an act of courage. Love is not a performance of loyalty to someone's stagnation. It is a commitment to mutual rising, to walking alongside someone who isn't perfect but is willing. Willing to listen, willing to adjust, willing to hold their own mirror. And when you find that kind of love, you'll know. Because it won't require you to disappear in order to be accepted. There's a strange kind of silence that falls after someone tells you, without hesitation, that every person they've ever dated was crazy. It's almost a casual comment, said with a shake of the head and a smile that invites sympathy. At first, you might even feel bad for them. Imagine what they've been through, all that emotional wreckage left behind. And maybe you think, at last, someone who will finally be understood. But eventually, if you listen closely, not just to the words, but to what's missing, you'll notice something hollow in that story. Something that leaves out the part where accountability should live. Something that turns every conflict into a one-sided narrative where they are always the misunderstood one. The hero who tried, the victim who never got a fair chance. And suddenly that little red flag in your gut starts waving again. It's easy to get swept up in the romance of being the one who's different. There's an addictive warmth to feeling like the person who will finally heal someone's past, the exception to their pattern. But here's the truth hiding beneath that flattery. If every ex was toxic, irrational, emotionally unstable, what does that say about the person telling you the story? Carl Jung warned us about projection, that when we deny a part of ourselves, we often cast it onto others. The bitterness we won't own becomes someone else's flaw. The chaos we create becomes someone else's fault. And if a person has never stopped to ask, what was my part in this? Then they haven't learned. They've simply rehearsed a script of blame that will eventually have your name in it too. There's a soft kind of horror in realizing that you are just the next chapter in someone's unfinished story. A story where the ending has already been written, where your role is to soothe, to accommodate, to rescue, and eventually to disappoint. Because no one can sustain the fantasy of being perfect forever. And when the first crack shows, when you say something they don't like, when you assert a need or draw a line, suddenly you look a lot like the crazy ex they talked about. What's insidious about this phrase is how cleverly it tugs on your empathy. You want to believe them. You want to be the safe space. You want to be patient while they heal from the damage. But the problem isn't always their past. It's their relationship with it. Have they examined it? Have they made peace with it? Or are they simply running from it, dragging their baggage into your home and asking you to carry it for them? It's subtle at first. Maybe they flinch when you disagree. Maybe they call you dramatic when you cry. Maybe they mock your boundaries as overreacting. And bit by bit, you start questioning your own instincts. You start policing your tone. You start rewriting your text. You start shrinking your emotional expression so they don't mistake it for madness. This isn't healing. This is shape-shifting into someone easier to love. And here's what's terrifying about that. You may not even realize you're doing it because it doesn't happen all at once. It happens over weeks, months, through stories that sound like confessions, through jokes that carry quiet contempt, through comparisons that seem harmless until you're the one being compared. I've met women who have lost years in relationships like this. Women who walked in confidently and left doubting every memory. Women who, even after it ended, still couldn't shake the voice in their heads whispering, maybe it was me. That's the lasting damage of projection. It doesn't just distort the relationship, it distorts your sense of self. And let's not pretend this is always conscious. Sometimes these men truly believe their stories. They've repeated them so many times, added just enough sorrow, just enough vulnerability that even they're convinced. But sincerity doesn't make a lie true, and a man who hasn't owned his shadow will always cast you in it. Jung once said, "What we don't make conscious controls us." So when a man has unresolved patterns, fear of intimacy, need for control, avoidance of pain, and refuses to examine them, they don't go away. They simply look for a new host, a new mirror. And if you are kind and patient and open-hearted, you become the perfect mirror. But even mirrors crack under the weight of denial. The deeper tragedy here is how many women confuse this dynamic for love. We tell ourselves he just needs time. He's never had someone like me. He's just scared. And maybe he is. But fear doesn't excuse manipulation. It doesn't justify emotional immaturity. And it certainly doesn't mean you owe him your peace while he figures himself out. Because while he's processing or avoiding the past, you're living in the consequences. You're the one absorbing the suspicion, the volatility, the passive aggression. And slowly your world starts revolving around his wounds. You become the caretaker of his story, the therapist he never hired, the emotional buffer between his pain and the accountability he keeps postponing. You start explaining away your own suffering. You start hiding your hurt because he already has enough on his plate. You stop bringing things up because you don't want to trigger his trauma. And one day you look in the mirror and barely recognize the woman who used to speak so freely, love so fearlessly. All because someone told you a story about their exes and you believed your love could rewrite the ending. But some stories don't need new endings. They need to be shelved. They need to be studied, unpacked, processed, not repeated. So if you hear this phrase, I beg you don't romanticize it. Don't think it makes you special. Ask yourself instead, does he take responsibility? Has he ever said what he did wrong? Has he ever looked inward? Or is he always looking back with blame? Because the story he tells about them is a preview of the one he'll tell about you. Not because you'll fail him, but because he's already written the script and growth isn't part of it. You're not here to clean up someone else's emotional aftermath. You're not here to prove that love can be perfect if only you're patient enough. You are here to live your life alongside someone who is willing to own their story, not rewrite it at your expense. And if he can't do that, if every ex is the villain and he's always the misunderstood hero, then understand, you are standing in a fairy tale that ends in a storm. You deserve more than to be cast as the next crazy ex. You deserve truth. You deserve accountability. You deserve someone who sees relationships not as a place to hide, but a place to grow. Because that's what love should be. Not a place to bury your past, but a space to finally unearth it. There's a kind of manipulation that doesn't shout. It doesn't slam doors or make threats. It simply leans in, lowers its voice, and says, if you really loved me, you'd do what I ask. And just like that, the floor beneath your heart begins to shift. At first, it doesn't feel like manipulation. It sounds like a need, an invitation to prove your love. And because we're human, because we care, because we want to be loved well, we listen, we compromise, we bend, and often we break. But real love isn't a test you have to pass. It's not a maze of conditions you navigate, hoping to arrive at acceptance. When someone asks you to prove your love by betraying your boundaries, what they're really doing is twisting affection into obedience. I've watched women, soft, strong, luminous women, hand over pieces of themselves in the name of love. Not because they're weak, but because they're hopeful. They believe that if they just give a little more, try a little harder, the relationship will finally feel safe. But emotional blackmail isn't healed by generosity. It's fed by it. This isn't a request to be understood. It's a demand cloaked in sweetness. If you really loved me, becomes a spell. And before you know it, you're saying yes to things that make you uncomfortable. You're saying no to your own needs just to keep the peace. Carl Jung spoke of power hidden within the shadow, the part of ourselves we don't like to admit exists. And here, in this phrase, you'll find that shadow power at work. This isn't a conscious villain. It's someone using love as leverage, most likely unaware of how destructive that is. But the damage is no less real. Stoic philosophy tells us that love must be freely given, never forced. That anything coerced by guilt, by pressure, by fear of abandonment ceases to be love and becomes a transaction. And in that kind of transaction, your soul is always underpriced. You deserve to give from abundance, not fear, from choice, not pressure. And the thing is, the longer you stay in this loop, the more often you agree just to keep the relationship intact, the more your center starts to wobble. You wake up one day and realize you haven't made a free choice in months. You're living according to someone else's rules, wearing someone else's expectations, playing someone else's game. And then comes the next phrase, the one that cuts deepest. You're not enough for me. No matter how strong you are, hearing those words from someone you've trusted, someone you've softened for, creates a tear inside your spirit. It isn't just about love, it's about identity. It strikes at the most sacred part of you, your sense of worth. It took me a long time to understand that this phrase rarely reflects the truth. In fact, it's almost never about you. It's projection, pure and simple. It's someone holding their own inner emptiness up to your face and blaming you for not filling it. But we were never meant to complete anyone. That's not love. It's dependency wearing romance like a costume. You're not enough is not feedback. It's control. And often, it's not said in anger. Sometimes it's whispered, slipped into conversation when you are at your most vulnerable. After a mistake, after a disagreement, when you're reaching for reassurance and instead get rejection. But please hear this. No one has the right to define your value. Not a partner, not a parent, not a passing comment from someone too broken to see clearly. You are not too pale. You are not too little. You are simply not for people who cannot meet you where you stand. Jung once wrote that when people feel powerless inside, they will often seek control outside. And often the fastest way to control someone is to shake their sense of self, because if you don't know who you are, you'll do anything to be loved again. You'll twist, you'll shrink, you'll beg. And that's the point. That's why the phrase is used. A confident woman is harder to manipulate, but a woman who doubts herself, she's easier to bend. I want you to remember this the next time someone implies you're not enough. There is nothing missing in you that someone else's love will complete. The love you seek outside has to begin within, rooted in clarity, honesty, and radical self-respect. Because if you accept their lie, if you internalize that verdict, you will begin to chase approval instead of peace, and you'll lose both in the process. Then, just when you start to reclaim your voice, when you try to make an independent choice, you might hear the final phrase in this slow unraveling of self. Do whatever you want. Spoken not with kindness, but with bitterness, with coldness, with silent resentment. And that's the cruelest game of all, when someone stops saying what they feel, yet expects you to guess. When they punish you not with words, but with absence. When they claim to give you freedom, but lace it with guilt. Passive aggression is its own kind of violence. It leaves no bruises, but it breaks you just the same. Because now every decision becomes a minefield. You second guess yourself. You worry. You wonder if you did something wrong. And the truth is, you did nothing wrong. You simply dared to be free. We were not meant to decode love. We were meant to feel it. Clear words, honest feelings, gentle accountability. That's the language of mature love. Anything less is manipulation dressed as mystery. You deserve to be with someone who speaks plainly, who doesn't weaponize silence, who doesn't confuse ambiguity with depth, who doesn't require you to abandon yourself in order to stay close. A man who truly loves you will not hide behind riddles. He will not push you into choices and then resent you for making them. He will stand beside you even when you disagree, because real love can hold tension without breaking. Carl Jung said that the greatest tragedy is not the darkness we carry, but the refusal to face it. And in relationships, that refusal shows up in these phrases. Each one a small signal of something larger, a pattern, a refusal to grow, a denial of self-responsibility, a hunger for control. But you are not here to be controlled. You are not here to carry someone else's unexamined shadow. You are here to rise into yourself, to walk in clarity, to love from a place of wholeness, not sacrifice. So the next time you hear a phrase that makes your chest tighten, that makes your spirit shrink, pause. Ask yourself not, what does he mean? But what am I feeling? Because your body knows before your brain catches up. And you don't need permission to protect your peace. You don't need approval to choose yourself. You just need the quiet courage to believe that walking away is sometimes the loudest kind of love. Not for him, but for you. And that, dear listener, is the kind of love that never asks you to disappear.